For many people, the name Sun Tzu is associated with battlefields, generals, and strategy quotes shared by entrepreneurs who have never actually read him. He's often portrayed as a philosopher of victory, a secret sage who unlocked the psychology of conflict. But let's be honest, that narrative completely misses the point. Because when you set the slogans aside and look at what he actually said, a much more interesting picture appears. Sun Tzu was not obsessed with winning wars. He was obsessed with avoiding them whenever possible. He wasn't driven by glory, heroism, or displays of power. He was driven by cost. And in a world that was exhausting itself through constant warfare, Sun Tzu became one of the first thinkers to say this clearly. For a state, the greatest danger is not the enemy in front of it. The real danger is the bill that comes after the war is over. Most people think the art of war is about fighting. In reality, the book is about money. We are standing at the intersection of money, power, and history. And here nothing is as simple as it first appears. To understand why Sun Tzu thought this way, we need to go back to his time. His ideas didn't emerge in a vacuum. In the 6th and 5th centuries BCE, China was filled with fragmented kingdoms. Each believed it could unify the world, and each pushed its treasury to the limit, trying to do so. War was nearly constant. Alliances formed and collapsed. Armies grew larger. Aristocratic chariot duels gave way to massive infantry forces. And that meant something very practical. More grain, more metal, more soldiers, more taxes. States weren't just fighting wars. They were stress testing their economies. When a king sent his army into the field, he was essentially borrowing from his own future. And more often than not, that debt grew beyond what could be repaid. Today we imagine ancient warfare as heroic storytelling. But back then, war was first and foremost about logistics. The moment an army moved, expenses began. Wagons, horses, grain, armor, craftsmen, blacksmiths, cooks, all of them had to be fed. All of them had to be financed. A campaign lasting a few months could bankrupt a small state. A campaign lasting a year could shake even a large one. Yet trapped in a cycle of fear and insecurity, they kept fighting. It was an early arms race, and it was pushing the entire system toward a breaking point. This is the environment in which Sun Tzu emerged, not as a quiet philosopher, but as a strategist trying to solve what looked like a military problem, but was at its core an economic crisis. Today, we describe him as the CEO consultant of the ancient world. But in reality, he was more like a risk analyst. He thought about numbers, he thought about time, he thought about logistics, and he realized that the way states were managing war was unsustainable. For him, success meant nothing if the treasury was empty. Most rulers believed their greatest risk was the enemy's army. Sun Tzu believed it was their own spending. That's why at the very beginning of The Art of War, he says, "War is of vital importance to the state." The word vital here isn't romantic. It means dangerous. It means destructive. It means that if mismanaged, war can destroy the very state it claims to defend. The rest of the book essentially revolves around this question. How do you keep war under control? How do you shorten it? How do you make it less costly? The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. This isn't mystical wisdom. It's the idea of achieving results without spending resources. No nation has ever benefited from prolonged warfare. That's not poetry. It's a financial reality. As campaigns drag on, production suffers, agriculture weakens, and the tax system strains. Sun Tzu's emphasis on speed, intelligence, and psychological superiority comes from the same logic. These tools are cheaper than massive armies. He wasn't trying to make states successful in war. He was trying to prevent them from going bankrupt while trying to win. Before his time, war was largely about honor. But as it grew in scale, it became more complex and more expensive. States had to regulate currency, increase taxes, and build bureaucracies. War was no longer a romantic stage. It had become a massive budgetary burden. Sun Tzu saw that clearly. War now required cold calculation. He treated war like a balance sheet. Supply chains, resource depletion, opportunity cost. Even though these terms didn't exist yet, he understood the logic behind them, because he knew this. Every decision on the battlefield is ultimately an economic decision. If you miscalculate, you don't just lose soldiers, you lose the state's resilience. When you read The Art of War through this lens, it stops sounding like poetry and starts sounding like a strategic economic report. He lists 5 fundamental factors: moral unity, timing, geography, leadership, and discipline. These are really different forms of practical questions. How stable is your state? How resilient are your people? How efficient is your administration? It's a risk analysis. The section he dedicates to supporting an army is especially striking. The farther you go, the more it costs. Prolonged campaigns are a slow path toward an empty treasury. Transported grain can cost more than soldiers' wages. Long wars weaken agriculture. Wasteful commanders exhaust their countries for the sake of small victories. We could summarize his mindset with a simple idea. Logistics doesn't support strategy. Logistics is strategy. His thinking on intelligence follows the same logic. A single piece of accurate information can prevent a massive army from marching in the wrong direction. One good spy can be worth millions. For him, information was the cheapest and most powerful weapon. Even his insistence on speed is economic. When he says, "Speed is the essence of war," what he really implies is this: every day you wait, you lose money. Sun Tzu was not against war. He was against waste, and the greatest waste was unnecessary war. What's interesting is that this logic still applies in the modern world. The Soviets in Afghanistan, the United States in Vietnam, the empires of World War I. These wars were not lost purely for military reasons. They were lost because the economic burden became unsustainable. Today, we see cyber warfare, sanctions, proxy wars. Why? Because they are cheaper. In many ways, they all follow Sun Tzu's logic. Create the greatest impact with the lowest cost. Sun Tzu understood something essential. Real power doesn't come from the army alone. It comes from economic strength, from the ability to absorb shocks and keep functioning. Technology has changed. The math hasn't. The real lesson is this. Sun Tzu was not teaching rulers how to win wars. He was teaching them how not to go bankrupt, because the cost of conflict continues long after the fighting ends. States often collapse not because they lose battles, but because they exhaust themselves economically. For him, true victory meant still standing after the war. The Art of War is not a book about courage. It's a book about limits, not a manual for showing power, but for maintaining balance. Sun Tzu speaks not from the perspective of a warrior, but from that of a steward, someone responsible for protecting the long-term health of the state, because he never separated economics from power. War is the most expensive decision a state can make. A leader who miscalculates its cost prepares his own downfall, and perhaps his most important message is this: strength is measured not by how hard you strike, but by how long you can afford to keep striking. History shows us this again and again. It's not the bravest that survives, but the most economically disciplined. History does not repeat itself exactly, but it makes us pay the same price again and again. If this perspective opened a new window for you, stay tuned. And if you subscribe and like the video, you'll be supporting me in creating many more pieces like this.